Hi, my name is Rona Ichenogwa, and you're welcome to Creative Female Convergence.
So, first of all, we're going to be having our first speaker who will be talking to us on local stories and global relevance. She is a documentary photographer, photojournalist, public health worker from Nigeria. Was born and raised in Maiduguri, Borno State. She has a BSc in nursing from the University of Maiduguri, Nigeria, an MSc in Public Health and Health Promotion from London South Bank University in the UK, an MFA in Experimental and Documentary Arts from Duke University, USA. She was previously a visiting lecturer at Duke Kunshan University in China. She specializes in documenting cities and towns, highlighting both the positives and negatives of each location. She focuses on health perspectives, using photography as a medium to highlight problems at the community level. She also has an interest in documenting cultures, conflicts, urban poverty, rural development, and humanitarian issues. She has a special interest in creating counter narratives for underrepresented communities. Her current work is a personal project to showcase her hometown of Borno State at the time of Boko Haram. Bits of Borno on social media has gained critical acclaim and has been published in media outlets including the New York Times, BBC, Reuters, CNN, Voice of America, Newsweek Europe, Irish Times, and the Nigerian newspapers. All right. Help me welcome Fati Abubakar. Thank you very much.
Saying this is not actually my first time in Benin. I always get excited when I come here because I really enjoy looking at the cultural attire in terms of the beading and all of that. I've taken a few pictures in Calabar and other Yola and other places where I wear the traditional clothes. I'm hoping that I can do it here too. But in the interest of time, it may not be possible. So as she said, my name is Fati Abubakar. I work mainly in Borno State, and for the last 10 years, since 2015, I've been documenting the impact of the conflict on our local communities. So as you know, since 2009, there's been the Boko Haram conflict, which has destroyed many parts of our local communities. We have 27 local governments. We'll see it in the slides as we proceed. Next slide, please. Next slide. So we have 27 local governments. So during the conflicts, there were many places that were destroyed. So the areas in red you will see are inaccessible because of the conflict, and you see the areas in green are accessible. So for the last 14 years or so, we've had that conflict. And one of the main reasons I started my project, I was initially, I studied nursing and I spent about 8 years or so in medical college. After that, I graduated actually during the conflict. And in 2013, I decided to start my master's in public health, mainly because I was interested in how there are issues within local communities, but they are not, they don't have access to health care facilities. And usually when you go to local communities, you see that most of the health centers are destroyed, etc. After 6 weeks in my mother's village, I wanted to continue in public health nursing. So in 2013, I went for my master's, and while I was there, the conflict was still ongoing. And because of the conflict, I faced a lot of depression while I was abroad. I was torn between the fact that I had a lot of privilege being able to go abroad, while people in my local community were also being ravaged by terrorists. So a lot of what we saw in the news while I was there, while I was studying, was the terrorism that was ongoing. When you click on Facebook, you click on Twitter, you watch CNN, all of what you see is usually this type of reporting. And in the next slide as well, you see what I keyed in on at that time was the numbers. Usually they say 15,000 died, 12,000 were killed, etc., etc. So when I call home, you usually hear my mother giving me a different version of the story. So I was clinically depressed, honestly, and I was on medication because of that. And I talked to one of my professors who now mentioned, why don't you look at that as your dissertation? Why don't you explore the impact that conflict has on students that are living in the UK? So I took about 3 or 4 months exploring the impact, the psychological impact of war on students that are studying, while looking at how it affects me as a student as well. So I went to a conference where we were taught about the importance of resilience. And after that, I became really fascinated with the idea of resilience. How do communities bounce back from conflict? How do communities become resilient? And coincidentally, I went on Facebook and there was this page called Humans of New York. It's just like a beautiful coverage of everyday life. And I decided to learn how to take photos because of that page. So I bought a camera and I Googled how to use a DSLR, and then I started photographing. And one thing I discovered was that it was very therapeutic for me. Every time I took a picture, I was incredibly happy. And I would walk around the streets, I would take really nice pictures. I accidentally learned how to use the ISO because of that, so I'm self-taught. So when I went back, the news you hear from mainstream media is quite different from what you hear in local communities. And especially for our region, it was really the fixation on how people are suffering. But when you go there, an hour after a bomb blast, you see that the market is back, people are back doing weddings, they're naming ceremonies, people are getting married. So for me, it was important that I changed the narrative. So the theme of my work was bits of Borno, bits and pieces of everyday life in Borno State was what I was looking at. So I would go out every day, take my camera, interview people, ask them how they're coping, ask them what they're doing on a regular basis, what are things that they love to do. So I crashed a lot of weddings, I went to a lot of parties, I went to student parties, I went to turbaning ceremonies in the Shinu's Palace. I would go to IDP camps. I went everywhere, I think, for the last 10 years. All of the villages I went to, for me, it gave me a lot of hope in the sense that people can bounce back from all kinds of adversity. And so the collection of my work really isn't just looking at our community as a place of terrorism, but as a place of resilience. And when you look at the project, I think that one of the reasons it had global impact was because people were really exhausted by the mainstream images of death and despair and tragedy. And historically, if you look at Africa in general, what you see is a representation or misrepresentation of what Africa is usually the poor dying child in Somalia, the hungry woman in Ethiopia. So when they keep their lens on local communities in Africa, it's usually that kind of representation. And I feel that as someone who is from that local community, I wanted to change that. I wanted to change how we're perceived, how we're looked at. And I always give an example of Rwanda as a place of hope because many years after the genocide, they've been able to bounce back and they control how they're perceived. And it's also a government effort because the government is really trying to change the face of Rwanda. So coming to the theme of the event, I don't want to take too long to talk about my history and all of that. So, but before going to the theme of the event, hold on, sorry. I wanted to explore a little bit about the pictures as well. Like, if you look at them, this was one of the parties that I went to in the in one of the graduation parties for the students that I followed. In the last 14 years, the university had not closed. It was one of the institutions that had refused to succumb. Boko Haram, which literally means education is forbidden, was the university was fighting against that to ensure the students stayed. So for the last 8 years, there were no graduation parties, no matriculations, and a lot of events were cancelled because of that. So this was the first party that the students were having in the 8 years that I had documented at that time. Let's go to the next slide. And I did a story for a UK newspaper called the Mail and the Guardian. They have a section called The Continent. I pitched for them actually to report on this story. Because of the conflict, a lot of men had been killed, and women were now being forced to become breadwinners. So we were seeing like a shift in the way that women were operating within the local communities. Previously, you couldn't have a shop, you couldn't have a business in certain ethnic groups because it was sort of frowned upon. A man was supposed to take care of you. But during the conflict, we started seeing more young women in businesses, and I wanted to profile that. We had a lot doing interior design, there was makeup. So this series was generally about the different women who had studios within their homes and outside their homes as well, to be doing a lot of the beauty and spa treatments. And it's a really booming business because in Maiduguri we have about 200 weddings or so most weekends. So it's really a thriving economy for people. So I wanted to profile how women are at the forefront of that. Next slide. And this is actually my mother's hometown. So I have a series called The Ghost Towns, and I just go to rural villages that had been destroyed. Most of them had been empty for about 10 years or so. So as people are resettling back to communities, I joined an NGO called UNICEF, and we would go to smaller communities, and I was following them mainly because I wanted to see not only the impact of the conflict on people, but the impact of the conflict on infrastructure as well as the land and the soil. We're a very agricultural town, so I wanted to focus on that as part of what is being destroyed. So this series was entirely dedicated to the ruins left of people's homes, especially my grandparents' home as well. We hadn't been there for about 10 years. So this series explores how people gravitate to the church as a form home. So I spent a lot of time in churches as well in Maiduguri. There's this perception that a lot of Christians are being killed, and people sort of feel like it's only a focus, like a laser focus on a certain religion. But I think in general, all of us have suffered. And I wanted to see how people cling to religion as a form of hope. So I spent a lot of time in the churches. I didn't know the services were long, so I spent like 5 hours in the church service. I would get tired, they would offer food. It was a very interesting project because I learned a lot about how community helps you bounce back to resilience. And this was a series I did about women who had lost their husbands. As I was saying about how many men were killed, this is particularly the vigilante groups. Because of how complicated the issues are within our conflict zone, a lot of men became volunteers as vigilantes to sort of help the military understand the terrain and also fight the terrorism. So about 28,000 men as of 2016 had joined the vigilante group to join the military to fight at the forefront. Unfortunately, a lot of people have died, and most women are widows, so there isn't really like a scheme or anything to take care of them after that. So I was profiling the vigilante deaths as well as the military men who had died as well. So this series, which is the final one I'll speak on, I'll send you the website so that you can learn more about it. But this series explores the mental health of men, which is an irony because it's an International Women's Day. But I do want to talk about how a lot of conflict zones sort of neglect the mental health of men and boys who have been forcibly conscripted, I would say, into terrorism. And when they come back, a lot of them come back very traumatized with a lot of mental health issues. So we have a safe corridor program by the military that sort of reintegrates them into society. But a lot of them have lost families, lost identities. So I went to the camp specifically to look at the series on the missing men. So I think that's the end of my talk on some of the images. I want to talk more more about the theme and why stories are important. So I believe that as storytellers, whether you are a writer or a photographer or a filmmaker, I think that you have the power to control how you're perceived. You have the power to change the narrative of your local community. And I've been to Edo multiple times, and a lot of the stories we cover about migration, people going to Libya, people coming back from Libya. So I think I haven't learned a lot about this community. I don't know about the culture, I don't know about the local government names. I think there's so many stories here that are unexplored, untapped, a lot of things you can talk about locally that may have global impact. And how do you achieve global impact? I think social media is a tool because for me, I posted one picture and it went viral, and that was the beginning of my career. So I think as a visual generation, you have the opportunity to utilize social media for global impact. And what I usually do as well is that I follow key people on Twitter, especially before it became X, and now it's a horrible place. But you're able to see a lot of editors that are talking about the stories that they have pitched, the stories that they're covering around the world. So you have the ability to reach out to them. Twitter is a very, very simple place if you know what you're looking for. So I did a lot of pitches at that time. I would look at an editor who was looking for pitches, and I would write to him and I'd say, I have a story that I would like to explore from so and so. And usually they pick it up. So social media utilization was really, really good for me. I was able to tell all the stories I wanted to because of that. You no longer have to wait to intern for a newspaper or anything like that. You easily are able to tell your own stories. So I would say explore that story. And I always push people to, look at personal stories, stories about ourselves. So when I was teaching in China, a lot of the stories that I push students to do is about their families. There's a lot of history within your family that you do not know. The Chinese are also very similar to us as Nigerians. We're very silent, we're very grounded. You don't know how your grandmother met your grandfather. A lot of this oral storytelling is kind of disappearing. So I usually encourage them to talk about personal stories. I think that has more impact because people see themselves in you. So I usually encourage tapping into your family history as well as tapping into your local community. What are stories in your local community that you can talk about? It can be something as normal as a wedding, it can be something as normal as a birth, but I think it's vital that we discuss ourselves first before we explore the other. Like if I hadn't really focused on Borno State at that time, I wouldn't have understood other localities as much as I understood my own locality. So I usually encourage that. And while working on that, it's usually important to have identity, know who you are. Who are you? What are things that you want to do? How do you reflect on yourself first? Because self-awareness is very vital before you go into other communities. You have to understand yourself. So for me, I knew that I had many identities. I'm a Kanuri woman, I'm a Muslim woman, I'm in a conservative community that is against a woman in a male-dominated industry. So know your challenges first before you even venture out. So that helps you sort of ground yourself and understand others better because you know yourself. So, and narratives are incredibly powerful. I always say that if we, like, I don't know the Chino Achebe quote fully, but I can paraphrase, if you wait for someone to tell your story, they will misrepresent you, they will change how you're perceived, and they will also misconstrue or paint you in a light that is not necessarily you. So I do encourage that we become the persons behind the lens. We have to really control how we are perceived, and we have to counter how we are shown in mainstream media. But I would say, because we're in International Women's Day, I usually do amplify women's voices. I think that as a woman photojournalist, there are spaces I go to that men don't have access to, especially in conservative communities. women talk to you more than they talk to other gender, so I think that you have that power to amplify more women's voices. And for me, it's very vital because I come from a community where there are places a woman cannot even speak. So I think when you become the storyteller, it's vital that you focus on very important topics that affect women. And in terms, another thing I want to talk about is excellence. I do a lot of workshops as an instructor, and I usually see the women, they're usually the ones shying away, they're not confident about their work, they don't represent themselves well. To achieve global impact, you really have to have that confidence. Your work has to speak for itself. It has to be more excellent than anybody in that group. So I think working and refining your craft is very, very vital for global impact. If you go abroad and you're doing like subpar mediocre work, you may not be able to stand in the room where experts are because you haven't refined or honed your work. So I would say excellence is very, very vital. You have to be top par no matter what. So I encourage going to workshops, I encourage attending festivals, going to art exhibitions, going to whatever that is art related. Like you're here already, so it's a good start. But I do encourage people going back to film school as well, or to art school in general, because in a place like Nigeria, we're very, certificate based. And when you go abroad as well to compete in the global economy, you really have to have that certification. I went back to art school like after 3 years because I wanted to learn other mediums as well. I know how to take photographs, but do I know how to use audio? Do I know how to fly a drone? It's a highly competitive industry, so you have to really have 3 or 4 skills before you can compete in the global economy. So I would encourage that you enhance your skills, think about scholarships and going abroad, because you're narrowing yourself if you stay too long in the local community. So I would say expand your horizons, but always come back home. I'm not a fan of the Japa, phenomenon. I really think that go there, spread your wings, learn as much as you can, but then come back home, just like TellThatStory is doing, and give back to the local community. It's nice to have all the nice apartments, get all the money abroad, but you're in a developed world that developed itself. You have to also come back and develop your own world as well. So feel free to jump off and come back. So in terms of global reach, just like I said, I encourage volunteering. When I started, I was getting paid about 20,000 naira or so to volunteer at an NGO, but I learned so much. So I would say that it's very vital not to look at money in the beginning, although money is very important. Look at what you're learning from any organization that you're with. So spend time, intern, volunteer, go to different places, pitch to photo editors, use social media. So I would say those are things that work for me. And also networking is something that is very vital. Talk to people when you come to workshops, have a compliment card that you can distribute. Be very, very, very confident, and also reach out to even people that you don't imagine will respond to you. So when I write a story, I have a template for pitching and I send it to about 30 different people, and then at least one person will respond. So I would say pitch more, attend more workshops, intern and volunteer, go to art exhibition, but most importantly, go back to art school. So that's the end of my lecture.
Thank you very, very much, Fati Abubakar. Are you done? Yes. Yes, okay, go. Can I have the mic? Thank you. Round of applause for her. I was listening to, when she started about her projects in Maiduguri, and I just quickly recalled that I spent some time in Kano. I did time, and I say that specifically because for the first couple of months it felt like I was in prison. And that was because of the mental images I was fed before I had to go to the north to serve. And I remember I did extensive research, but it didn't really quell that fear that I was going to the lion's den, you know. So imagine after spending some months and nobody was harassing me, nobody was asking me why I'm dressed a certain way, why I don't have a hijab, or it was really, really smooth. In fact, the people that I had personal problems with were people who came with me. So I'm just trying to say that the media really has a lot of power when it comes to shaping the way we think. I stayed in Kano for a while, and you know, to some extent, Kano is nothing compared to what, you know, some other northern states have gone through in the hands of, you know, terrorists and all of that. But still, the media made it sound like if you just go there, you would just be seeing dead people on the floor. So yes, I really do agree. We need to take telling stories into our own hands and, you know, try to see things for ourselves. If you have any questions, this is the time to raise them.
First of all, thank you for the lecture. That's basically that was amazing. Then yesterday, when I went to paint my nails, this girl was the person who was painting my nails. She was paying so much attention to how she, you know, like she's a designer, how she was moving the brush, trying to make something. I was like, oh my god, that's so cool. I wish I could like video that and maybe like do a documentary on like salons and what's going on in their heads and just explore that. But then I did not know how to like where to start from, how to give it like an image that actually like makes sense that people would want to watch. What's so interesting about like salon and someone just like painting your nails and their lives. And I just don't know how to explore that. So I just wanted to ask you how you think I should go about that.
That's actually a very beautiful story, and I think that I usually do encourage people to talk about mundane things, like something that can be simple can also be very beautiful. So I would say that you can start by the workshops that I was talking about. If you're interested in filmmaking, I think just like I started by going to YouTube, how to use a DSLR, you're able to like explore how do I begin in filmmaking? How do I tell a story? Even with mobile, like last week, we just finished our workshop in Maiduguri about mobile cinematography. So it's not usually the complicated cameras. You can start with a phone, but to understand the basics and the technicalities is very important. So I would say start by going online, watching videos. There's so much on LinkedIn, like Coursera and all of that. Start learning about filmmaking if that's something you're interested in, and also being behind the camera. But additionally, another option is why not go with a filmmaker and tell him your vision so that he'll write a script about it and then film it for you. But there are two options usually. You either become behind the camera as the filmmaker, or you become the producer and then you direct somebody on that storytelling that you want to do. The second is easier, but I would say it's good to understand the basics, because if a filmmaker is working, you also have to be informed about what he's doing. So start with the workshops, go on YouTube, learn all you need to know about filmmaking, and then decide which one you want to be: producer, director, cinematographer. Which one do you want to be first? Then you take the next steps from there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else have a question?
Thank you so much again.
Yeah, Miss Fatima, you mentioned about pitching, and recently I've been learning about it, but I'm not too certain how to go about making pitches. And I want to know, was there any time during your project that you were stuck and you just felt like, oh, where do I go from here? How do I build this story? Because you gave a good answer to her question, but then how do you find more story? How do you build a story? It's not just like identifying a story. How do you like take it all and flow?
So I'm wondering, are you a writer or a
I'm a
filmmaker?
journalist.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, creative block is, something that we all experience. But for me, usually, I don't know, it's very simple, my solution to it. I like taking long walks, to clear my head first, and then you can always come back to the story. But one key thing that I encourage is having a mentor, somebody you can talk to about where you're stuck, what you think are the next steps forward. Sometimes somebody who's neutral can give you clarity on how you're feeling. So if I have questions, so I don't know what to do, I usually call my mentor and then I tell him, this is how I feel, or tell her, this is how I feel, what should I do next? Somebody who's a veteran in the industry usually can guide you in those steps that you need to take. However, I always emphasize on the need for having a mentor that is kind, because not everybody is kind. We live in a society where people feel that being harsh, pushing you to the extreme. Some mentors can actually even steal your story. So I think you have to key in on somebody who's very kind, who wants to see you progress, who really knows how to talk to young people. Those are very vital. But I forgot your other question. Yeah, so in terms of pitching, there was a journalist when I was working in UNICEF. She came to Maiduguri and she was covering a story. So I talked to her about my difficulties with pitching. How do I pitch? Who do I reach? So I'm part of a group of women photographers. It's called womenphotograph.com, and it's about 1,000 women or so. We have a network, and we also have a African women photographers group. We have a WhatsApp group about 300 people or so. So it's always good to reach out to someone and say, I'm finding this difficult. So she gave me a template of how she pitches. And she's a National Geographic storyteller. So when she gave me that pitch, I used it and it worked for me. So I'm happy to share with you as well via email what that pitch looks like, but it's mainly tailored for photographers. Maybe you can use it a little and tweak it. And then I'll give you the list as well for editors around the world that you can pitch. They have an Excel sheet for that group of ours. You may not get many replies, but I would say 30 to 50 emails usually I send, one person will reply.
All right. Where?
Good morning, ma'am. Thank you so much for this. What you spoke about, line the documentary and all of that. And I had a question before I came here because I always wondered, okay, people have stories to tell, and how do you go about sharing these stories? And beautifully, you talked about that, the idea of pitching stories to writers, because sometimes they want to tell the story, but you're not sure how to convey the stories. And you already set it clearly on that. Thank you so much. But I just wanted to share a bit about the kind of creative and how can we part of it.
Yeah, so Canem Creative is, you can go to the About, and then in a few years ago, I set up and found an arts foundation, and it was an idea for 4 years or so, and I couldn't get funding. I got pissed off, and then I applied, and then I jappered, and then 2 weeks into my trip, I got a random email from somebody who said they were looking to fund projects in the Northeast. So it was just after a frustrating 2 years of searching for grants was when I actually found a random person who just wanted to fund this. So I wrote my 2-pager and I explained what I wanted to do. And one of the reasons I started it is because when I started as a photojournalist, we didn't have a lot of people in our local community that were photographers, filmmakers. We always had a foreigner come in to document what was happening. So I felt a little alone as an indigenous person. I wanted more people learning about photography. So I set up the foundation. I incorporated my mentor as a board member, and then I started just doing workshops. We do an open call online. If you go to the project section of the website, so we do an open call online, and then The first time we did an open call, we got about 300 applications. So we had to sit down and look at all of the people who were interested, and we chose 35 of those participants, and we were able to train them for about 10 days. So what we do under our projects is that we have the Canem Creative workshops. We have our center. If you click on the center section, we have a small hub, smaller than this, but we have a small hub where we do our teaching. For about 10 days, we teach them photography, filmmaking, audio documentaries, and then we have an exhibition after a 3-month mentorship. So far we have 4 cohorts since 2022, and we have been training them and mentoring them under the Canem Creative Hub. And usually what we do is after we do the workshops, we keep them for the mentorship because we want them to understand that it's continuous learning, but also we teach them and attach them to other people where they can intern and also learn how to pitch to other organizations and start working. So most of them are interested in like non-profit work. So if there's someone who is looking for a photographer, we have the Canem Creative Consultancy, which is our business model where we attach the student to go and do the photos for the NGO, and then we pay them after the NGO pays us as well. The reason why we do that is because the grants are not sustainable. Like, you know, with USAID leaving under the Trump administration, you have to look at sustainability projects. You can't continuously wait for grants to come in, but you have to find a business model that works. So if you go to the cohort section in the project section, you will see the cohort. We have the Canem Creative cohort. I'm actually the one designing the website, so I didn't change the name, so you'll see some white names there, but I'll finish it today or tomorrow. So all of our students, we take headshots of them, and we have a section where you can see all of our 4 cohorts. And then on the other section, you see the photo walk where we go out into local communities and film videos and take photos and face a lot of harassment from the military. But it's usually very fun and exciting. Then we have our student archive. If you go on the website, you'll see where we archive all the images that they have taken. The recent images are not there, but why we do that is because we want people who want to buy the images to have a section where there's a print sale, and if you like an interesting image, you can purchase that as well. It's still growing. We're 2 years old, but we hope to learn from TellThatStory. Maybe you can teach us a few things about running an art shop. I will tell you, it's very hellish. It looks very beautiful on the website, but it's very chaotic. It's very draining. You don't sleep a lot. But I think that it's very inspirational that we're building a thriving creative economy. I went on a long-winded response to your question, but I hope I've answered it.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much.